Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I want to say thank you to Social Media Cowboys for sponsoring this week's episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. If you need help with a website, if you need social media needs for your business, if you need help with AdWords, SEO, all those things that you know you should be doing, but you are too busy to do or you're too confused about, they are the experts that you need in your corner. If you're interested in launching a podcast, such as mine, they help me edit my podcast and do a fantastic job making sure that all of the technical side of it is handled and we launch a nice, neat, edited podcast episode each week. So I want to thank Social Media Cowboys for their continued sponsorship of the Confidence Through Health podcast. You can find them at socialmediacowboys.com, or you can find them as well with other sponsors at confidencethroughhealth.com. Well, I want to thank you, John, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today, Jerry. So I'm really looking forward to it.
So one of the things that I've talked about once or twice before with my podcast and with guests on, but you take it, I think, to a more scientific and science-based, research-based level than what they do, is the properties of sound and what they can help us with from a health standpoint. And we were talking a little bit before about just music in general, and we all have those moments where we hear a song and it automatically lifts us up, or maybe gets us in a upbeat, ready for a performance type of situation. But sound goes much deeper than that with our connection with the human body, right?
It does indeed, Jerry, yeah. Well, my story really begins way back in 1997. At that time in my life, I was an acoustics engineer. I'd actually had almost my whole career in acoustics up to that point, nearly 30 years at that point. Anyway, I carried out a series of acoustics experiments in the Great Pyramid of Egypt.
Oh, wow.
In 97, and that was the life-changing moment for me. Two things happened during that event. Just about 3 weeks before going out to Egypt to conduct these experiments. Have you ever been in the Great Pyramid, by the way, Jerry?
I haven't, no.
Okay, well, you've got a real pleasure awaiting you when you do eventually get there. The acoustics are absolutely extraordinary in there. You know, it's like reverberation is the term that's used to describe sound when it's not like a full echo when you don't hear a full word coming back to you, which you might say in a canyon or something.
Right.
But in a space that's very reverberative, you get multiple reflections of your voice as you're speaking, say, and it all comes back crowding to your ears at slightly different times. This makes for really difficult conversation in this king's chamber, unless you give yourselves permission. Like if you're with someone and you give yourselves permission to be like within a foot of each other's noses, then you can understand what the other person's saying. But get any farther apart than that, you're really going to struggle. But the good news here is that this kind of reverberation in a chamber like the King's Chamber is really excellent for sound therapy, right? And this is obviously one of the subjects that we're going to be talking about today. And what happened for me, Jerry, which was very fortuitous, really, which was that 3 weeks before going out to Egypt to carry out these experiments, I injured my lower back quite badly. Now, normally, you know, that would definitely have been something that, well, people would have looked upon it as just a terrible thing to happen, you know, and so on. Turned out to be a great gift, because when I eventually got myself into the pyramid after those 3 weeks of severe pain, and I was still in severe pain, you know, as I entered the pyramid, I'd taken a lot of analgesic pills, probably too many, overdosed a bit, but just to try to mediate the pain to the point where I could function and I could think, you know, because when you've got severe pain, it's really hard to think clearly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got myself into the pyramid with the help of other people, carried in the equipment and so on. And this experiment that I wanted to conduct concerned the sarcophagus, which is a box of rose granite. It's kind of a pinky colored granite from Aswan, and it's very highly resonant, which means if you strike it with your fist, it literally rings like a low-pitched bell. It's got an amazing sound. And from an acoustics engineering point of view, I was really fascinated, to learn more about that.
Right.
And the experiment that I decided to carry out concerns cymatics, C-Y-M-A, cymatics. And this is a relatively new science, although it was actually started about 200 years ago by Ernst Chladni and then by Michael Faraday, the famous English scientist. And Ernst Chladni was a very famous musician, physicist guy. And but really very little has happened in the world of cymatics since those early days. I have really explored cymatics very deeply from a scientific level. What I wanted to do in the Great Pyramid was to make visible the vibrations in that sarcophagus. So to do that, I stretched a membrane across the open top of the sarcophagus and then placed a small speaker in the bottom so I could make sound into that sarcophagus. And so that's what I did after the antiquities inspector helped me to set the experiment up, and then I started making these sounds into the sarcophagus, still in great pain. Sprinkle sand on the surface of the membrane. Why? This is like the revealing medium. If you're talking about forensic science, you pick up a glass, say, with your finger and your thumb, and if you look really carefully at that fingerprint or that thumbprint, you might be able to see it, even if you know where to look, right? But if you sprinkle on some fine powder, like talcum powder, right, there immediately you see it. Well, it's a similar kind of thing to that with sound and a membrane. When sound encounters a membrane, it causes that initially very flat membrane to have little undulations on its surface, like imprinting sound onto the membrane. And to make those imprints visible, well, you need some kind of a revealing medium. It can be powder or it can be sand, which is what we use because it got lots of sand in each. Right? So we just collected some sand from outside the pyramid, and that was what we literally used to sprinkle on the membrane. Well, what happened, Jerry, was absolutely life-changing and completely extraordinary. And it was that we began to see ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs appear in this membrane stretched across the ancient Egyptian sarcophagus, right? I had no concept in my mind that we were going to see anything like that. What I thought we would be seeing would be some typical cymatic patterns, which are usually circular. They're usually very symmetrical and very beautiful, a bit like a rose window in a cathedral. You know how it has all those beautiful elements to it. Very similar to that usually. Anyway, to see these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and then we saw one after the other, coming up on the membrane. I took photographs, so I've got all the photographic evidence, right? But about 20 minutes into this experiment, I suddenly realized that there was no pain in my lower back. All that pain that I had been experiencing for 3 weeks had just completely vanished. Well, Jerry, in that moment, I thought I knew the answer to this because it was such an extraordinary moment to suddenly realize no pain. And I thought, I know what's going on here. I'm excited. Who wouldn't be, seeing these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs appear? And the excitement, when we are excited, various hormones flood our bloodstream, and also opioids, natural opioids like endorphins, flooding our bloodstream. Various other hormones like dopamine and serotonin give us a euphoric feeling. Right, so I was feeling euphoric and also had no pain. So I thought, I know what's happening. All of these natural opioids and so on are flooding in my bloodstream, masking the pain, effectively muting it, right? And I thought, when I get back outside the pyramid and back to the hotel, this pain is going to come back big time. But it never, ever did. So I realized in that moment, when the pain never came back, I knew that there was a major discovery waiting to be found here, to be something that could help medical science for the future. And then the other aspect to that amazing experiment were these hieroglyphs. You know, if we can create, if sound can create ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, you know, what else can it do with this technology? That was the question that entered my mind. And so for the last, well, more than 25 years, you know, I've been focused on first developing the CymaScope instrument, which you see behind me here, by the way. This is a scientific instrument that makes sound visible, now not using particulate matter on a plastic membrane, but now using the exquisitely sensitive surface of pure water. That's what we use now. So we imprint sound onto that exquisitely sensitive membrane of like the surface tension of pure water. And we get, obviously, it's a very accurate scientific instrument, and now we have them in universities all over the world actually using this instrument for many different scientific disciplines. But then the other aspect of my work has been focused, as you know, it's been focused on understanding the biology behind, well, first of all, how did that pain miraculously disappear and never come back, right?
Yeah, right.
And then moving on from there, all of the wonderful effects that occur in our body when we are immersed in either specific sound frequencies, as I was there in the Great Pyramid, or in music, which of course has a vast array of frequencies that we are immersed in, you know, whenever we experience music. So that's been my work for this last quarter of a century.
Yeah. Well, and so my first question to all that is did it seem like it's more of specific sounds and frequencies, or does it depend on, like, is it different per person? Like, is it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, Jerry. Thank you. Well, no, it's not specific to a different. The same effect would occur with any human being, or indeed any animal, actually any mammal for sure.
Okay.
I'll tell you the story, if I may, of exactly how I ultimately came to discover the mechanism in relation to the pain, right? Because this is a very specific story. What happened was, this is many years ago now, I began collaborating with Professor Sung-Chul Ji of Rutgers University regarding a series of experiments that I wanted to conduct on human blood. You know, one of the quotes from antiquity is from Pythagoras of Samos, who lived about 500 years, you know, BCE, 2,500 years ago, roughly.
Yep.
Pythagoras of Samos was obviously a Greek philosopher, and one of his statements, one of his quotes is that music can be used in place of medicine. He actually said those words, right? And a very famous quote. And I realized that very little research had actually been conducted to verify, or that particular thought that music can be used in place of medicine.
Right.
So I designed this experiment. Actually came to me one day lying in bed when I was just waking up. I don't know if you get your thoughts, best thoughts at that time, but very often in my case, when I'm just waking up, these thoughts, where do they come from? I have no idea, but this thought popped into my mind. I could use human blood to test that hypothesis or that statement of Pythagoras. And the experiment is really simple, but I needed a really experienced biologist to work alongside me initially, just to kind of shepherd me, through those early experiments. And this was Professor Sung-Chul Ji of Rutgers, and he came here and we worked side by side to design the protocol. It's really simple. It just consists of taking a test tube of whole human blood, which, by the way, we get from a blood bank.
Right.
And then you warm it up because it arrives here chilled, warm it to normal blood temperature, and then decant that test tube into two smaller test tubes. One test tube goes into the laboratory Faraday cage, which is actually a small room that's electromagnetically screened, but it's also very, very quiet in there. It's extremely quiet. It's quieter than the quietest bedroom, let's say,
Right.
So that's the control experiment, and in the Faraday cage is a small incubator to keep it warm at normal blood temperature. The other vial goes into the main body of the lab here in an incubator as well. But in that little incubator, we have a small speaker. So now we can play music to that blood.
Right.
Now, before the experiment begins, we do a baseline test on the blood to count the number of viable red blood cells. This is the ratio of dead red blood cells to living. You might think, well, why are they dead? Well, when you receive blood even from a blood donor just the day before, it's taken out of his or her arm, say, the day before, then it arrives here. Yeah. Even so, there are millions and millions of dead red blood cells in that vial of blood. Also, many millions that are healthy and well, but also many more millions that are in a kind of, well, they're classed as medically old, and they're starting to, the outer membrane of, if you know what a beautiful red blood cell looks like, it's kind of that lovely circular with a dish in the middle. Yep. It's beautiful, right? But the old red blood cells are not so beautiful anymore. The outer membrane is starting to break up, and eventually in the body, the cell will die, and it'll be mopped up by the body's systems, right?
Right.
What I was interested in is, can music regenerate those old red blood cells, right, and give them a new lease for life?
Right.
That was the essence of the experiment. Well, we started with many different kinds of music. The very first piece of music we tried was classical music, and we had both thought that classical music would provide the best result. Yeah. It turned out not to be so. Oh. Very best results, Jerry, came from pop music.
Oh, wow.
And the pop music that worked the best was that it had the most dominant bass beat, right? Boom, boom, boom. Right. This is the music that produced the really best results. Even classical music produced pretty good results, but nowhere near as good as the popular music. And this was the clue that led us to the discovery, actually, of how my lower back had been healed, right? Okay. So what it is, we were scratching our heads over, why is it that classical music doesn't provide as good a result, say, as the pop music? And we went away to lunch and scratched our heads and chatted a bit. And we came to a realization that maybe it's the low frequencies in the popular music that is making the difference, Right. Because that's the fundamental difference between classical music and popular music in terms of the spectrum of energy, the spectrum of frequencies, right? So what we did was we put some blood we injected some blood into the CymaScope instrument. Why? Yeah. Because it has a fabulous low frequency response. This little speaker we're talking about in the laboratory incubator as typically with small speakers, it didn't have a really good bass response. It was pretty good, but realizing that there was no energy below about 80 hertz, something like that. So we put it into the CymaScope to see how it would react, how the blood would react to very low frequencies. And what we found, we injected, a 40 hertz tone, a very low frequency tone, into the blood. And what we saw emerge on the surface of the blood, bearing in mind that blood is nearly all water, it's composed of water mainly, right? So I expected to see a cymatic pattern emerge on the surface of the water, and that's exactly what we did see. Beautiful pentagonal, actually hexagonal was the first one, hexagonal pattern. And then, but the surprising thing, Jerry, this really got our juices flowing, as it were. When we then removed the energy, literally by bringing the slider down on the mixer, that pattern stayed imprinted on the blood, right? Now, normally with cymatics, what happens is when sound enters into, in this case, water, normally the CymaScope instrument uses water, right? When sound enters into water, all those trillions and trillions of water molecules are just kind of floating around in a very random fashion. It's called Brownian motion in the scientific terminology. They're just randomly floating around. Not any organization is not present. Right. But as soon as sound frequencies enter the water, suddenly all of those trillions of molecules are ordered, beautifully ordered, right, in the blink of an eye, right? and thinking now, Jerry, in terms of your body, when
Right.
it's immersed in music and you are comprised of mainly water, right, as a human
Right.
being.
Yep. Yep.
So now, anyway, coming back to the experiment. So with the blood, going back to the water, if you then remove the energy, the sound energy going into the water, that pattern disappears immediately.
Right.
And the water molecules go from their beautiful order back to normal kind of chaotic, movements, right?
Right. Yep.
With the blood, the pattern stayed imprinted on the blood permanently.
Huh.
Well, not permanently. It took about 20 minutes for it to
Okay.
dissolve away.
Okay.
And the upshot of all of this is as follows. What happens in blood when music enters into blood, and these very low frequencies, in this case 40 hertz, enter into blood? It causes the oxygen, which is already dissolved in the blood. Remembering we got the blood from some person the day before, gave their blood. It goes, then it comes to us, right?
Yeah.
That blood still has the oxygen of the last breath that person took. So as they're taking a breath, the respiration, saturates their bloodstream with oxygen. And then the phlebotomist man or woman takes the blood out of the person's arm and sends it to us. So that blood, when it arrives with us, is engorged with oxygen. But it turns out that oxygen is not available to the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells. Why? Because there's no pressure. You have to have pressure for that merging to happen. And in your bloodstream, in your physiology, what happens is every heartbeat causes low frequency sound to literally go throughout your whole vascular system and cause the oxygen in the bloodstream to bind to the hemoglobin. So boom, 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 boom. It's binding with every single heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
So now coming back to our experiment with a 40 hertz tone, the 40 hertz is a low frequency, very low frequency sound that caused the hemoglobin molecules to bind to the oxygen that was already dissolved in the blood. Therefore, all of the dark, very dark red color of the blood when it arrives with us, like a dark maroon color, suddenly becomes bright scarlet, right? Really bright scarlet, because now the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells have held on to that oxygen, and it makes them turn bright scarlet, right? So all the parts of the pattern, the cymatic pattern, that are called the antinodes, this is the areas of highest pressure, they become the elements of the pattern that we can see.
Okay.
And then when you remove the sound, it doesn't matter, because the hemoglobin molecules are already holding on to that oxygen, and they're not going to let go of it, right?
Right.
So this was the clue. So now, coming back to my time in the Great Pyramid, what happened that day? Well, my lower back was in a state where it's called a hypoxic state. This hypoxic state means that the muscles in my lower spine, my lower back area, were in spasm. And this is a deliberate strategy of the human body when you have a back injury. If you have a spinal injury, your body, in medical terms, it's called splinting. It splits the area where the damage is. And you know how if you have a broken bone, you would put a splint in your arm, wouldn't you, or whatever, to support that as it's healing. Well, the body does something very similar with a spinal injury. It provides a natural splint. And this natural splint, in this case, would be like my spina erector muscles all going into a really, really tight spasm. And they're saying to your body, you will not move this area of your body, because if you do, you will damage the healing process that's going on, right?
Right.
Remembering that this injury had happened 3 weeks earlier. So most of the healing had actually already happened in the 3-week period, right?
Yeah.
But the splint was still very much in control and saying, you will not release, you will not move. Right? So this is why it was so difficult to get into the pyramid, because the entry corridor is only about 4 feet high. And here I was with this splint in my spine, this natural splint.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I'll tell you that this splinting cycle, as it's sometimes called, is way more painful than the original injury. It's really painful. If you have a cramp, Jerry, in your muscles, you know what that feels like. It's really painful, right? And one of the reasons for the pain is because in a cramp, what's happening is the muscles are literally squeezing out the blood. So that muscle now becomes hypoxic, it's lacking blood supply, and that causes the pain, right? Yeah. And the more the muscle squeezes, the more the oxygen is squeezed out, and the greater the pain. It becomes more and more severe, really painful. Similar sort of thing with a natural spasm in your spine when you have an injury. So in my case, what I was doing, I was using low frequency sound in the sarcophagus initially, down to 50 hertz, for example, right? Starting to see these amazing hieroglyphs, and for sure, I was high on dopamine and so on, serotonin and oxytocin, all flooding through my bloodstream for sure, right? I was really euphoric. And but at the same time that was happening, these low frequencies were penetrating deeply into my body, into my vascular system, and causing more oxygen to be made available in this splint that was this natural splint. And what happened was that natural splint suddenly was given permission, if you like, to let go, because it was being fed with oxygen. So it got all this oxygen, and then it just vanished. And then with it, the pain, no pain, right? So that's a kind of a very short version of the discovery that we made that day. But coming back to the kind of the larger implications of that, it means basically that music has this amazing effect, particularly the low frequencies in music, that when they penetrate your body, and I'm talking now, Jerry, about full body immersion, not with headphones. We can come to headphones, in a few minutes if you like, because there's another aspect to healing with sound that's really important via headphones. But this other aspect that I'm talking about now is how you can gain more oxygen in your body by immersing yourself in musical frequencies.
Right.
The reason it happens is for that mechanism I've just described, that low frequencies actually act in a very similar way to what happens in your heart. It's mimicking really what your heart is doing. Your heart produces a pulse that circulates the blood for sure, but it's also a pulse of low frequency sound. And it's that sound that causes the binding of the oxygen to the hemoglobin. So now you get the picture that when your full body is immersed in music, those low frequencies in the music penetrate deeply into your tissues and cause the same process to happen as what your heart is doing. It causes oxygen bindings. And then when you know that oxygen is the key molecule in your body for healing, all the processes, almost every process in your body requires oxygen to power it. So the more oxygen you have in the body, the more healing you have. And this is one of the many reasons why music is so healing from a full body perspective.
Right. So one of the other people I've had on talked about using music in laying on the ground and just having music piped into the room loud enough, but at that deeper frequency as well. They explained that piece. They didn't explain the physiology of what's going on. I don't know that they knew that piece, but they knew that if they laid on the ground, like almost meditating, but just and felt the frequency through the ground, right? Like you just lay in your living room, you put the music on, you've got it loud enough to where you can feel the frequency. And they said that would elicit that healing piece to happen. And so is that basically what's happening?
Yeah, there's another aspect to this, Jerry. It is a very complex subject actually, but I can break it down a little bit. Because when you lie down on the floor, hopefully you've got a blanket on you or something, to keep yourself warm. But when you lie down on the floor and you meditate, let's say you're in a gong bath. Have you ever experienced a gong bath?
No, I haven't, but I've seen them, yeah.
Right? It's something, again, you've got to look forward to. a gong bath is where usually they have a number of people, maybe 10, 20 people who are have been invited to take part in this gong. They call it gong bath. The other type of bath you can have, sonic bath, is a singing bowl bath or a crystal bowl bath. But basically, these are types of sounds that they have thousands of frequencies. Like a gong, when you play a gong, as long as it's not played too loud, it is a beautiful experience. It's almost like standing by a waterfall. It's a type of noise, but it's a musical noise, and it's very, very beautiful to experience. And your cells in your body actually it's like a form of nutrition for the cells. I know we talked earlier, just before we came on, about nutrition, that you're very interested in that, as am I. Yeah. But I'm also interested in sonic nutrition, and it's one of the subjects that we could touch on today if we have time. But coming back to just to the basics of a person lying there in a meditative state, regardless of whether this is a gong bath or just music coming into the room from speakers or whatever, that person goes into a parasympathetic nervous state. You have two major autonomic states in your body. One of them is your sympathetic state. In sympathetic states, you probably know, this is readying your body for action. Right? You're going to run away from a saber-toothed tiger, say, right, or some other danger. Yep. And in evolutionary terms, these wonderful mechanisms occur in your body when you need to run away and protect your life from some danger. And what happens in your body is that cortisol floods into your bloodstream from the adrenal glands, and it basically creates a situation where you are supercharged with energy. All of your muscles are ready to go and run or do whatever they need to do. There's also glucose is made available to help this process of running away, to feed your muscles. Also, your immune system is shut down. You don't need an immune system when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, right? You don't need that. So it shuts that down for you, and so on. Now, this is okay if you're running away from some temporary danger. But if you're in a situation in your life where you're chronically stressed, because this is the stress hormone, cortisol is the stress hormone. If you are chronically stressed, then cortisol is permanently in your bloodstream, and your immune system is permanently on a kind of go slow, right? Because cortisol literally causes it to go slow. It's saying you don't need this right now because you're going to run away. Well, you're not. This is chronic stress, and of course, nature didn't figure this. It didn't allow for a chronic stress situation. So it's not good at all to be chronically stressed. We can talk about how you can reverse that as well in this conversation. But coming back to this person lying on the floor now, they're no longer in what's termed a sympathetic state, even if they were stressed when they came into the room. When they lie down and start to relax, their autonomic nervous system will take them out of this sympathetic state and will gradually transfer into a parasympathetic state, which is called the relax and heal mode of your sympathetic autonomic service state. So basically now your body is in a healing mode. Your temperature will start to drop, right? This is why you have to have a blanket over you. In fact, your temperature may even drop to such a degree that it will send a signal to your hypothalamus in your brain to say, hey, your body's getting too cold, right? And then what happens is the hypothalamus, which is responsible for like your body thermostat, will send signals to all of your blood's vascular system and your muscles, and it'll basically warm you up automatically. It does it. It's just all so clever, But anyway, in this parasympathetic state, now all of the natural innate healing mechanisms in your body will kick in and you will start to heal. It's a bit like being in bed asleep, This is when your body does most of its healing. And it's a similar thing when you're in a meditative state, lying on the floor. And even better, if you are in a room that has a beautiful sound system, or better still, live gong, live harp, live crystal bowl sounds. All of these
Right.
are this form of sonic nutrition which can supercharge your cells. So it's
Yeah.
it's a really fabulous thing to do.
So one of the things that just to go back to the very beginning, but one of the things that triggered in my head is a correlation. And tell me if this is similar to what you've seen happening within the body, in the physiology of the body. You were talking about the membrane that you had to be able to see sound, right? And
Right.
so can that correlate to our cell membrane, and our cell membrane getting like stronger and healthier, and I sort of picked up a little bit on that as too. So like as the blood was getting, you know, it changed color because it's getting more oxygen into the cell, and so is there a correlation there as to how that sound actually operates within the body and within the cells?
There is a very strong correlation because the basic principle of cymatics is that whenever sound is present and there is a membrane present, then there will be a cymatic pattern imprinted on that membrane. This is a simple law of physics, right?
Okay.
And these membranes that I'm referring to, by the way, apart from all the trillions of cells in your body that have membranes, there are also membranes all around us all of the time. So even now, as I'm speaking, the sound emitting into this lab, into this laboratory, there are many different surfaces that my voice energy is imprinting and creating patterns on the surface, invisible to the naked eye, but nevertheless, they are imprinting. Coming back now to your correlation idea here, yes, of course, because as sound enters our body, all of the trillions of cell membranes have to receive a cymatic pattern. And it's one of the many mechanisms by which sound is healing. Now, you may not know it, but every cell in your body sings a song. Did you know that, Jerry?
No, I didn't know that.
It does. This is a discovery that was made in 2002
Okay.
in UCLA by Professor James Jimzewski. And he and his team, for the very first time, listened in to the sounds that cells make. And the reason that cells make sounds is because of all the metabolic processes that are going on, thousands of processes going on inside every cell of your body all of the time. And every biochemical reaction inside the cell creates sound. This is another law of physics, right? Every biochemical reaction creates sound. Therefore, actually, in your body, it's a pretty noisy place. And in every cell is creating sound. So now the cell membrane is what they call respirating. It's literally moving with sound because of all these metabolic processes going on inside the cells, right?
Yeah.
So that literally creates a sound. And James Jimzewski was the first person to listen into that sound, and he called this sonocytology, the sound of cells.
Wow.
Well, what happens in a body when you have, for example, an invasion of a pathogen, or you might have imbibed some toxic substance, or your general toxic load is too high, then a system of cells in your body can go to sleep. This is called the G0 phase of the cell cycle. And literally, they're not dying, these cells, a system of cells. They're just basically sleeping. They're waiting for healing to occur.
Right.
And one of the ways that sound can bring them back onto the cell cycle refers to exactly what you've just been talking about, how the interaction between sound and the cellular membranes, because every cellular membrane receives a beautiful cymatic pattern wrapped around the cell membrane, literally.
Yeah.
And because sound, the phases in sound are never static, like music, for example, is changing all the time. And from a cymatics point of view, what that means is that the pattern is never static. It's always rotating around the cell membranes if you're immersed in a musical environment, say.
Right.
So now, if you think about the surface of the cell membrane, it's not smooth. It has little antennae that project from the cell membrane. These are called integral membrane proteins. And it's the way that the cell communicates with its brother and sister cells. It's the way that it takes in nutrients. It's the way that it excretes waste products and so on, right? Well, these are little antennas. So now you get the idea, Jerry, that when the cymatic pattern wraps itself around the cell membrane and is slightly rotating, it literally massages these little IMPs as it goes, right? Beautiful little massage, gentle massage. And this is a form of sonic nutrition. This is a way to encourage the cell to reawaken and to rejoin the cell cycle. And that's exactly what happens. So this is another one of many mechanisms where if you are lying on the floor enjoying a gong bath or a singing bowl bath, for example, all these thousands of frequencies are showering your body and causing cymatic patterns that literally cause the cells that are asleep to reawaken. It's like the kiss of the prince, the Sleeping Beauty story. The prince comes in and kisses the princess and she awakens, right? It's a similar sort of thing. But even if you don't have a system of your body that's asleep and therefore, causing you to be ill, it re-energizes all of your cells. And that's why after a gong bath or a crystal bowl bath or whatever, you come out of that room feeling absolutely wonderful. You feel energized and ready for anything. So it's a really wonderful way to start your day or to end your day.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fascinating, like truly, because I can see so many applications where we could be applying this lower frequency in healing modalities and to help the body. Because I'm a firm believer that the body, if you give it what it needs, it can heal itself. It's got all the tools. It's got all the, the DNA's got all the stuff in it to be able to do that.
I think also it's very important to know, leading on from what you just said there, it's very important to know that only the body can heal itself. There's a lot of talk about sound healing. I don't like the term sound healing because it infers that sound is doing the healing, actually making you well. Well, it is, but not directly. Sound is the catalyst or the stimulus that triggers your body's own innate healing abilities. Only the body can heal itself. And one, I know we're running out of time, but one last thing, Jerry, I really would like to share with everyone because it's so important. I mentioned earlier in our chat about headphone healing, right?
Yes.
This is another important discovery that I've made, and it relates to the vagus nerve system. Now, we were just talking about chronic inflammation in the body. A chronic situation is something that nature really hasn't taken account of.
Right.
So if some event has occurred in our lives that has caused chronic inflammation, I know a lot of people are talking about a trauma, physical trauma, like a car wreck or something, right?
Sure.
If you have something really physically, really horrible happen to you, it can create a cascade of effects in your body that leads to chronic inflammation. Also, as I also mentioned earlier there about toxic load, if your body is too full of toxins through, pesticides on your food, you're not washing your food, you're not washing your vegetables before you eat them, you're just you're just basically eating them off the shelf basically without, taking care, then eventually your body's very good at handling abuse, but eventually it will say, no, thank you. I've had enough of this.
Right.
And something will change in your body and you can go into a state of chronic inflammation and very painful as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people in this world, Jerry, have fibromyalgia and all sorts of other chronic conditions. And there's nothing that mainstream medicine can do. They can help a little bit sometimes with a short course of steroids or something, or prednisone. Right. But basically, there's no cure for chronic inflammation. I'm about to share with you a cure for chronic inflammation that comes entirely from music.
Yeah.
And this is what the reason it's so important that I needed to really share this before we end today. And what it is, the vagus nerve system in the body is, if it's stimulated optimally, it will completely reverse chronic inflammation.
Okay.
So the vagus nerve is a system of two nerves that when it leaves the brainstem, it first branches off to the left and right ears. These are the pinna of the ears. They're a little bit like parabolic dishes, you can think of them. Of course, they do service to help to bring sound into our hearing system. You know, they're collecting sound from the environment, aren't they? But the other thing that nature has provided here is wonderful, which is that the vagus nerve system goes to the pinna of the ear. This is the outer ear, nothing to do with the auditory nerve. This is a completely separate system. Right. So in other words, now think of these parabolic dishes on the sides of your head as collecting sound from the environment, not so you can hear, but so you can improve your vagal tone, what's called vagal tone. Yeah. In other words, you're going to stimulate your vagus nerve system automatically just by being in a sonic environment. And if you'd go back in evolutionary terms, those sounds would have been the sounds of the wind in the trees, the sound of falling water, the sound of waves crashing on the ocean shore, the sounds of animals, all sorts of natural sounds, right? Yeah. Would feed into this system and help to keep the human being in tip-top condition, basically, in terms of their vagal tone. Yeah. Well, it turns out that, again, very low frequencies are needed to optimally stimulate the vagus nerve system. And when the vagus nerve system is optimally stimulated by wearing good quality headphones and listening to very specific types of music, then if you're unlucky enough to suffer from chronic inflammation, what happens is in your body, in your bloodstream, you have two types of cytokines which are fighting with each other they call it in medical terms a cytokine storm, so they're literally fighting with each other, out of balance, causing this chronic inflammation in your body. Within about 3 weeks of applying beautiful music, listening to beautiful music through good quality headphones, those cytokines gradually come back into balance and your body returns to homeostasis and health, right? And there's nothing that the medical people can do to help you. But if you know about this headphone concept, you can help yourself just by listening to beautiful music. Yeah. And I made a discovery that I call the audio heterodyne discovery, which means that certain albums of music create very low frequencies when they play. And these are the low frequencies that are needed for optimal vagal stimulation. I'm very happy to share that list with you, Jerry, and you can share it with your listeners and your viewers, so that anyone that has chronic inflammation, even if you're watching this and you don't have it yourself, but you know someone who has chronic inflammation, you will be able to help them with this beautiful system that I've just described.
That's awesome. And speaking of getting in connect, like, how can people, if they've heard that and are like, okay, I need to know more, I know you've got a course that's going on, how can people connect with what you're doing and follow along?
Well, thank you for asking, Jerry. Well, first of all, regarding the course, this is the Shift Network course. I'm now teaching a course on what I term frequency medicine, which is basically an umbrella term that encompasses both sound frequencies, music frequencies, and light frequencies. And that course, you can, if you're interested in looking at that course, it's frequencymedicinecourse.com. It's as simple as that, frequencymedicinecourse.com, and that will take you to the course. It's already begun, but you can join late if you wish to, and you'll simply catch up with the replays of the earlier modules that you might have missed, right? And then the other two URLs, the first is CymaScope.com. This is a resource website, free. All the information on there is completely free. CymaScope, spelled C-Y-M-A, and then scope, like microscope. That's our resource site. And then the other site is soundmadevisible.com. And that's the side, that's little shop is how we basically support ourselves with sales that relate to every product relating to sound that we sell, helps to bring in a little bit of funding that we can then carry on our research. So it's a way of supporting ourselves with funding.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating. It makes total sense. And and it's, as an athlete, there's so many things that I can think of and be like, okay, I can correlate that when I listen to music before I go out and do something, right? And the way that different songs like make me feel before I go exercise. Like some of them just get me a little bit more juiced up and going. And sure, there may be the lyrics or whatever piece of it, but I can think back and go like, oh wait, that one's got more bass to it. That one's got tone and frequency is like, oh, I could totally relate now to like how these things are happening. And
I think the really wonderful thing here, Jerry, is that there are billions of people in the world today who do enjoy listening to beautiful music, but they are blissfully unaware of all these wonderful mechanisms that are going on in their body. They're actually supporting their health. They don't know it. They're listening to the music for enjoyment, right?
Right.
And that, of course, in itself does help your health because it gives you dopamine. And dopamine, if you have more dopamine, you have a boost of leukocyte production. White blood cells are proliferating and so on. So you do get health benefits just from enjoyment. Right. But in addition to that, you get many other health benefits, some of which I've described in our chat there.
Yeah.
And many others that I haven't chatted about. But, so all these billions of people are experiencing beautiful music, not really realizing how helpful it is to their health.
Right. It's amazing. Well, John, I want to thank you so much for being a guest and for helping us understand how we can take one more step into like taking control of our health in our own house, in our own environment. It's fascinating work that you're doing. And like, I love because I love talking to people that have that moment and it changes their life and their passion. And it changes the world because of something that happened to you. And not that I like the fact that you had back pain, but I love that spurred so much that's going to help so many other people.
Perhaps, Jerry, if I hadn't had that back pain, I wouldn't be sitting here today chatting with you and sharing this important knowledge with humanity. So it was a wonderful thing to happen, that accident that happened in my lower back. Jerry, I want to thank you so much for helping to spread this important information to the people of the world. Thank you so much. Many blessings.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.